The mother was abandoned at the hospital by her children, but a nurse did the unthinkable. Mrs. Dorothy Miller felt her hands tremble as she clutched the handle of her worn leather purse. Her 3 children stood there, frozen in the hallway of Mercy General Hospital in Minneapolis, but their words sounded like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. It was when Richard, her eldest son, spoke the words that cut her heart like a blade. "Mom, we think it's best for you to stay in a nursing home. We can't take care of you anymore." "But son, you promised I'd go home today," whispered Dorothy, her voice barely audible. "Things have changed, Mom. It's best for everyone," replied Jennifer, her middle child, avoiding her mother's gaze. Sarah Thompson, a nurse with 15 years at the hospital, paused in the hallway upon overhearing the conversation. She had just finished her night shift, but something about the scene made her linger, hidden behind the slightly open door of room 312. "When will you come get me from the nursing home?" Dorothy asked, still trying to understand. "Mom, we'll figure that out later. For now, just stay here at the hospital," said Michael, the youngest, glancing at his phone as if he had more important things to do. Dorothy felt her world collapse. For 2 months she had recovered from a severe case of pneumonia, always believing she'd return to the home where she'd raised her 3 children alone after her husband's untimely passing. "But I don't have Medicare for a nursing home. How will I pay?" she asked, her voice already breaking. "We'll handle it later, Mom. Bye," Richard said, turning away. Sarah watched the 3 children walk off without so much as a backward glance. Dorothy remained seated in the wheelchair in the middle of the hallway, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. Inside her old purse were just a few faded photos of her grandchildren, her heart medication, and a nearly empty bank card. The nurse approached slowly, her heart heavy with a familiar ache. At 32, Sarah had seen many families fall apart in that hospital, but never something as cruel as this. "Mrs. Dorothy," she called softly, kneeling beside the wheelchair. The elderly woman lifted her red, tear-filled eyes, forcing a smile as she always did when someone spoke to her. "Hi, dear. Sorry I'm still here. My kids had something to take care of, but they'll be back soon," she lied, still protecting the family that had abandoned her. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. She recognized that look, someone lying to shield the ones they loved, even when betrayed by them. "Would you like me to take you to your room? You'll be more comfortable," she offered. "No need, dear. They'll be back soon," Dorothy insisted, clinging to the lie, though her hands shook uncontrollably. Just then, Supervisor Barbara Wilson appeared in the hallway, scowling as usual. "Sarah, what are you still doing here? Your shift ended an hour ago," she snapped. "I was helping Mrs. Dorothy, Supervisor." Barbara glanced at the elderly woman in the wheelchair and sighed impatiently. Her family didn't sign her out, didn't pay for a nursing home, and her Medicare coverage has run out. "She needs to leave today," she declared, devoid of sympathy. "But her children said they'd take care of it," Sarah argued. "Her children are gone, Sarah. 3 receptionists confirmed it. They left and said they weren't coming back," Barbara said coldly. Dorothy closed her eyes and Sarah saw a single tear roll down her cheek. The lie had been exposed, and now she faced the most painful truth of her life. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. Dorothy shook her head, unable to speak. Barbara rolled her eyes and walked away, muttering about protocols and irresponsible people. Sarah remained there, watching the 73-year-old woman who had once been a devoted mother and was now completely abandoned. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Throughout the afternoon, Sarah tried repeatedly to contact Dorothy's children. Every number blocked her calls after the second attempt. She learned from a social worker that the family had lied about the nursing home. No admission process had ever been started. Dorothy stayed in the hallway, refusing to go anywhere. Sarah brought a snack from the cafeteria and sat beside her during her break. "Mrs. Dorothy, did you raise all 3 of them alone?" she asked gently. "My husband passed when Michael was a baby. I cleaned houses for 30 years to give them a good education," she shared, her voice heavy with nostalgia. "Did they graduate?" "Richard is an engineer. Jennifer works in administration, and Michael studied law. They all married well, have children. I was always so proud of them," Dorothy said with a sad smile. Sarah felt indignation rising in her chest. How could successful children abandon the mother who sacrificed everything for them? And the house where you lived? Dorothy hesitated before answering, as if the truth were too painful. I sold it to pay for Michael's private college. He said he'd get me a better house later, but he never could, she admitted, ashamed. Where did you live before coming to the hospital? In a small room at the back of Jennifer's house. But she said with the new baby, there wasn't space anymore, Dorothy confessed, breaking down completely. Sarah had to step away to cry in the bathroom. The injustice of the situation enraged her. When she returned, she found Dorothy asleep in the chair, emotionally exhausted. That night, Sarah couldn't bring herself to go home. She stayed at the hospital late, watching Dorothy sleep in the room that should have been cleared. At 3 in the morning, the elderly woman woke up confused, calling for her children. Haven't they come yet, dear? She asked, disoriented. Mrs. Dorothy, you need to understand something, Sarah said kindly but firmly. Your children aren't coming back, they abandoned you. Dorothy fell silent for a long moment, processing what deep down she already knew was true. I always knew this day would come, she finally whispered. I just didn't think it would be like this. What do you mean, Mrs. Dorothy? After I sold the house, they started treating me differently, like I was a problem to be solved, she confessed with painful clarity. Sarah held Dorothy's wrinkled hand, feeling the cold, trembling skin. Do you have any relatives, someone who could help? No, dear. I only had them. Or I thought I did, Dorothy corrected, reality finally sinking in. The next morning, Barbara Wilson arrived earlier than usual, determined to resolve the situation. Sarah, this woman needs to leave today. We can't keep patients without medical necessity, she said authoritatively. But she has nowhere to go, Supervisor. Not our problem. A hospital isn't a shelter, Barbara stated firmly. What if she gets sick on the street? It'll be our problem when they bring her back, Sarah argued. So you'll take responsibility for her, because I'll have to file a report explaining why a discharged patient is still here. Barbara crossed her arms. Sarah looked at Dorothy, who pretended not to hear but was visibly tense. A decision began forming in the nurse's mind, one that would change both their lives forever. Supervisor, I'll take responsibility, Sarah said, surprising even herself. What do you mean? I'll take her to my home, she declared, leaving Barbara stunned. Have you lost your mind, Sarah? You can barely pay your own bills and now you want to support an elderly woman? It was true. Sarah lived alone in a small apartment in the South Side neighborhood, was paying off a loan for a used car, and sent money to her mother in Rochester. There was hardly enough left for her own needs. I'll make it work, she replied with determination. Dorothy heard everything and began to cry again, but this time it wasn't just sadness. It was a mix of relief, gratitude, and fear of becoming another burden in someone's life. My dear, I can't accept this. You don't really know me, Dorothy protested. Mrs. Dorothy, you remind me so much of my grandmother. She was also abandoned by her family and spent her last years alone. I was just a child and couldn't do anything. Now I can, Sarah explained, revealing an old pain. The decision was made. That morning, Sarah took care of all the paperwork needed to bring Dorothy home. Barbara shook her head, thinking the nurse was making the biggest mistake of her life. Sarah's apartment was simple. 1 bedroom, a living room combined with a kitchen and a small bathroom. Dorothy looked around silently, feeling like an intruder. Mrs. Dorothy, this is your home now, Sarah said, preparing the sofa for the elderly woman to sleep. My dear, I don't want to disrupt your life. You're young, you must have a boyfriend, plans. Dorothy worried more about Sarah than herself. I haven't had a boyfriend in 2 years, and my plans can include you. Sarah smiled genuinely. That first night, neither of them slept well. Dorothy felt guilty for accepting the help, and Sarah wondered if she'd made the right decision. But when she heard Dorothy crying softly on the sofa, she knew she'd done the right thing. The following days were a difficult adjustment. Dorothy tried to help with household chores, but Sarah insisted she rest. The elderly woman felt useless, like too heavy a burden for this young woman she barely knew. Sarah, dear, Let me do something. I'm a good cook, Dorothy asked one morning. You're still recovering, Mrs. Dorothy? Don't worry about that. But I need to feel useful. Sitting around makes me think too much, Dorothy confessed. That's when Sarah noticed Dorothy's skilled hands. When the elderly woman picked up a blouse that needed mending, her fingers moved with impressive precision. You sew really well, Sarah observed. I learned when I was young. I made clothes for my boys when they were little. Then I stopped because they got embarrassed wearing homemade clothes, Dorothy shared with melancholy. What a shame. Handmade work like that is worth gold these days, Sarah remarked. Dorothy smiled for the first time since arriving at the apartment. There was something in her face Sarah hadn't seen before, a glimmer of hope. The next week, Sarah brought home a used sewing machine she found at a thrift store. Dorothy was moved when she saw it, like a child receiving their dream toy. My dear, you didn't have to spend money on this, she protested, but she was already stroking the machine affectionately. It's an investment, Mrs. Dorothy. You could take on some work to help with expenses, Sarah suggested. Dorothy started by doing small repairs on Sarah's clothes. Then the nurse brought pieces from her co-workers. Soon neighbors began showing up with sewing requests. Mrs. Dorothy, how much do you charge to hem a skirt? Asked Nancy, the neighbor from upstairs. Dorothy looked at Sarah, unsure about pricing. It had been so long since she handled money that she didn't know what her work was worth. $15, Sarah said, seeing Dorothy nod timidly. Wow, the shop downtown charges $25. Would you take 3 skirts? Nancy perked up. Dorothy spent the afternoon working on the skirts, and for the first time in months, she felt productive again. When Nancy came back to pick up the pieces, she was amazed by the quality. Mrs. Dorothy, you're an artist. The bars turned out perfect, Nancy praised, handing over $45. Dorothy looked at the money in her hands as if it were treasure. She had earned those dollars with her own work, after months of depending on others' generosity. Sarah, this money is yours. You gave me a home, food, Dorothy said, offering the bills. No way, Mrs. Dorothy. That money is yours from your work, Sarah refused firmly. Dorothy tucked the money into a small cookie tin, her first step back to independence. That night, she managed to sleep without crying for the first time since her children had abandoned her. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now continuing. The weeks passed, and Dorothy's reputation as a seamstress spread through the neighborhood. Her work was impeccable, and her prices were fair. Sarah watched the elderly woman's transformation with growing admiration. Mrs. Dorothy, you seem like a whole new person, Sarah remarked one morning. It was true. Dorothy had regained the spark in her eyes, stood taller, and smiled often. Work had brought her back to life. It's because I feel useful again, dear. I thought my life had ended in that hospital, Dorothy confessed. Your life was just beginning a new chapter, Sarah corrected. That Saturday, as Dorothy worked on a complex order, the doorbell rang. Sarah went to answer and found herself face to face with a well-dressed, middle-aged man she recognized immediately, Richard, Dorothy's eldest son. Good afternoon. I've come to pick up my mother, he said, as if nothing had happened. Sarah felt her blood boil, but tried to stay composed. Your mother is fine where she is, she replied coldly. Listen, miss, I don't know who you think you are, but that's my mother. I'm taking her home. Richard raised his voice. Dorothy heard her son's voice and stopped sewing. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from suppressed anger. Let him in, Sarah, Dorothy said, surprising the nurse with the firmness in her voice. Richard entered the apartment, looking around with poorly disguised disdain. He saw his mother seated at the sewing machine, surrounded by fabrics and thread. Mom, I've come to get you. We found a spot at a very nice nursing home, he lied shamelessly. And where were you the last 2 months, Richard? Dorothy asked, not stopping her sewing. Sorting things out for you, Mom. These things take time, he continued, lying. How did you even know where I was? Dorothy kept her tone calm, but Sarah could sense the growing tension. Richard hesitated before answering. The truth was, One of Dorothy's neighbors had mentioned to Jennifer's wife that she'd seen the elderly woman working as a seamstress. The family had grown curious about how Dorothy had managed to settle in. Someone from the neighborhood told me, "Mum, come on, I brought the car, you'll like the nursing home." Richard tried to hurry things along. Dorothy finally stopped sewing and looked straight at her son. "Richard, 2 months ago you abandoned me in a hospital. You said I was a problem that needed solving. Now you show up here wanting to take me away." Dorothy's voice was steady, nothing like the broken woman left in the hallway. "Mom, it wasn't like that. We always wanted what was best for you," Richard tried to justify. "What was best? The best was leaving me to die alone in that hospital." Dorothy stood up, facing her son for the first time in her life. Sarah watched the scene in awe. The fragile, lost Dorothy had become a strong, determined woman. "Mom, you're being dramatic," Richard snapped. "Dramatic? Son, I sold my house to pay for your college. I worked 30 years cleaning houses to give you kids the best. And when I needed you, I was thrown away like an old dog." Dorothy's voice grew louder. "It was complicated, Mum. We all had money problems." Richard tried to defend himself. "Lies!" Dorothy shouted, startling even Sarah. "You own a $300,000 home, 2 cars, your kids go to private school. You didn't abandon me because you had no money. You left me because I was no longer useful." Richard fell silent under his mother's relentless clarity. "And you know what, Richard?" Dorothy continued. "Today I found out I am good for something. I can support myself, help those who helped me. I don't need you anymore." "Mom, you're being ungrateful. We're your family." Richard tried to guilt-trip her. "Family. Family doesn't abandon, Richard. Family cares, protects, loves. You threw me out like trash. This young woman here," Dorothy pointed at Sarah, "did in 2 months what you never did in 73 years of my life." Richard glared at Sarah as if she were to blame for turning his mother against them. "And what does she want in return, Mom?" "No one does anything for free," he sneered. Dorothy stepped closer to her son and for the first time in her life raised her hand as if to strike him. Sarah held her arm. "Mrs. Dorothy, he's not worth it," she whispered. "Get out of my house, Richard, now," Dorothy ordered, her voice shaking with anger. "This isn't even your house, Mum. You're living here as a guest with a stranger," Richard spat venomously. "It's more my home than yours ever was to me," Dorothy replied with dignity. Richard stormed out, slamming the door, but not before threatening to return with his siblings. Dorothy collapsed into a chair, trembling with rage and emotion. "Mrs. Dorothy, you were amazing," Sarah said, hugging the older woman. "I've never stood up to my children like that. I always did everything to please them," Dorothy cried, but they were tears of relief. "You did what you had to. They need to know they can't treat you badly," Sarah comforted her. That night, Dorothy worked on a special piece, a blue dress for a client's daughter. Sewing helped her process her emotions, and every stitch was a declaration of her newfound independence. "Sarah, can I tell you something?" Dorothy asked as she worked. "Of course, Mrs. Dorothy." "Since my husband died, I lived to please my kids. I did everything they wanted, even when I disagreed. Today was the first time I ever said no to them," she confessed. "How do you feel?" "Scared, but free," Dorothy replied with a sad smile. The following week, life returned to normal. Dorothy had so many orders she could barely keep up. Sarah came home from the hospital to find her working late. "Mrs. Dorothy, you need to rest," Sarah warned. "Honey, this is the first time in my life I've worked because I love it. Cleaning houses was out of necessity. This is different," Dorothy explained. "But don't overdo it. You're 73, Sarah worried. "Exactly. I don't know how much time I have left to be useful," Dorothy replied wisely. Then the doorbell rang again. This time it was Jennifer and Michael, Dorothy's other 2 children. Both looked uneasy, nothing like Richard. "Mom, can we talk?" Jennifer asked timidly. Dorothy glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. The 2 stepped inside, amazed by the apartment's transformation. Fabrics were neatly organized, a new sarja sat on the table, and finished garments hung everywhere. "Richard told us you were living here," Michael said, looking around. "Did you come to take me away too?" Dorothy asked bluntly. "No, Mom. We came to apologize," Jennifer said, surprising Mrs. Dorothy. Dorothy stopped sewing and looked at her two children. It was the first time she had heard an apology since they abandoned her. "Apologize for what?" Dorothy asked. "For what we did at the hospital. It was cowardly, Mom," admitted Michael, visibly ashamed. "And why did it take you 2 months to regret it?" Dorothy wasn't going to make it easy for them. Jennifer and Michael exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direct question. "The truth, Mom, is that Richard convinced us you'd be better off in a nursing home. He said it was best for everyone," Jennifer explained, "and you believed him without questioning it." Dorothy kept her tone firm. "We were confused, Mom. Taking care of you at home was hard on everyone," Michael tried to justify. "Hard how? I barely caused any trouble. I stayed in my corner, didn't bother anyone," Dorothy shot back. "It wasn't that, Mom. It's just—" Jennifer hesitated. "Just what, dear? Spit it out," Dorothy pressed. "The truth is, Richard said you were becoming senile, that you'd soon need expensive medical care. He convinced us it was better to admit you right away," Jennifer confessed, ashamed. Dorothy was shocked by the revelation. Richard had lied to his siblings, manipulating them all to shirk responsibility. "And you believed that without even talking to me?" Dorothy asked, hurt. "We're sorry, Mum. We were cowards," Michael admitted. Sarah watched the conversation in silence, seeing Dorothy process yet another painful betrayal. Not only had she been abandoned, but her own mental clarity had been questioned by her children. "So now what? What do you want from me?" Dorothy asked. "We want you to come back, Mom. We were wrong," Jennifer said. "Back where? You told me there was no room for me," Dorothy reminded them. "We'll figure it out, Mom. Each of us can take turns having you stay for a few months," Michael suggested. Dorothy looked at her sewing machine, at the orders spread across the table, at the apartment that had become her home. Then she looked at Sarah, who had given her back her dignity and independence. "Kids, I appreciate your remorse, but I'm not leaving here," Dorothy declared firmly. "What do you mean, Mum?" Jennifer hadn't expected that answer. "Here, I have my work, my independence, my dignity. I have someone who treats me like a person, not a burden," Dorothy explained. "But we're your family, Mom," Michael insisted. "Family that abandons me at the hospital isn't family, Michael. It's an excuse," Dorothy stated bluntly. The two fell silent, with no arguments to counter the painful truth. "Mom, what can we do to make up for what we did?" Jennifer asked, genuinely remorseful. Dorothy thought for a moment before answering. "You can visit me. You can get to know your grandchildren while respecting the woman who raised you. You can stop treating me like a problem to be solved," Dorothy said. "But what if you need something?" Michael asked. "I'll manage. I'm earning my own money. I've got my dignity back." Dorothy pointed to the orders. Jennifer and Michael left, promising to return to talk more. Unlike Richard, they seemed truly sorry, but Dorothy knew trust would take time to rebuild. "Mrs. Dorothy, I'm so proud to see you like this," Sarah said after they left. "Dear, you taught me I can live for myself, not just to please others," Dorothy thanked her. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the weeks that followed, Dorothy's small sewing business grew even more. A client took a dress to a party and received so many compliments that she came back with 5 friends wanting similar pieces. "Mrs. Dorothy, you really should raise your prices. This work is worth so much more than what you're charging," Sarah suggested. "Sweetheart, I'm afraid of charging too much and losing my customers," Dorothy worried. "You won't lose them. Quality like yours isn't found just anywhere," Sarah insisted. Dorothy decided to test it. When the next client arrived, she charged $20 more for a complex dress. The woman paid without question and even asked for another design. "Sarah, it's working." Dorothy celebrated like a child. Dorothy's financial independence grew each week. She could now pay her share of the apartment expenses and still had money left for small luxuries she hadn't enjoyed in years. "Mrs. Dorothy, what if we looked for a bigger apartment? With 2 bedrooms?" Sarah suggested one day. "Do you think we could afford it?" Dorothy brightened at the idea. "With your business growing like this, I think so." Sarah did the math. They began searching for apartments in the same neighborhood. Dorothy insisted on paying half the rent, establishing an equal partnership rather than dependence. It was during this search that something unexpected happened. Richard showed up again, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought an elegant, middle-aged woman. "Mom, this is Atty, Elizabeth, our family lawyer. We came to settle an important matter," Richard announced. Dorothy eyed the pair suspiciously. She knew her son well enough to understand he never did anything without self-interest. "What matter?" she asked dryly. "Mrs. Dorothy, your son told me about your situation. Since you're living with a stranger, he's concerned about possible financial exploitation," the lawyer explained. Sarah felt her blood boil, but Dorothy stayed calm. "Exploitation? How so?" Dorothy pressed. "This person could be taking advantage of you, using your vulnerability to get money," the lawyer hinted. Dorothy looked at Sarah, then at Richard, finally understanding the real reason for the visit. "Richard, are you worried about me or the money I'm making?" she asked directly. "Mom, what kind of question is that? Of course I'm worried about you." Richard feigned indignation. "Then why bring a lawyer? Why not come alone, like a concerned son?" Dorothy insisted. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The truth was, he'd found out Dorothy was earning well from her sewing and wanted control of that money. "Mrs. Dorothy, as your family, they have the right to protect you from ill-intentioned people," the lawyer tried to persuade. "And who are these ill-intentioned people?" Dorothy asked sarcastically. "This girl living with you, she could be planning some kind of scam." Richard finally revealed his suspicions. Dorothy stood up and went to the can where she kept her money. She returned with several bills and tossed them on the table. "Want to know where my money is, Richard?" "Right here. Every penny I've earned from my work. And do you know where Sarah's money is?" "In her bank, where it's always been." Dorothy was furious. "Mom, we just want to protect you," Richard insisted. "Protect me? Son, where were you when I needed protection in the hospital? Where were you when I had nowhere to live?" Dorothy raised her voice. The lawyer tried to intervene, but Dorothy wouldn't let her. "Atusas Elizabeth, my son brought you here to try and take my money. He abandoned me when I had nothing, and now he wants back in because he found out I have something." Dorothy was blunt. "Mrs. Dorothy, that's not quite the case." The lawyer tried to soften it. "It's exactly the case. Richard never cared about me when I was sick, alone and abandoned. Now that I'm making money, you show up with a lawyer talking about protection." Dorothy wasn't fooled. Richard realized his strategy had failed miserably. His mother was no longer the fragile, easily manipulated woman he once knew. "Mom, you're being ungrateful. We've always done what's best for you." He tried to shift the blame. "Best? The best was abandoning me in a hospital? The best was lying to your siblings, saying I was senile? The best was never coming back to see me?" Dorothy listed each betrayal. The lawyer began to realize she'd been deceived by Richard. The situation wasn't as he'd described. "Mrs. Dorothy, I apologize. I think there's been a misunderstanding," the lawyer said, already standing to leave. "There's no misunderstanding, counselor. My son wants my money, plain and simple," Dorothy clarified. After they left, Dorothy collapsed into a chair, emotionally drained. "Mrs. Dorothy, I'm so sorry about this," Sarah comforted her. "Sweetheart, now I understand why Richard abandoned me first. He was always the greediest of the three," Dorothy revealed. "Do you think he'll try anything legal?" Sarah worried. "He can try, but he won't succeed. I'm lucid. I work. I support myself. No judge will side with him." Dorothy had clearly thought it through. That night, the two talked about finding a lawyer to protect Dorothy legally. The elderly woman decided to draft a will, leaving her assets to Sarah as a way to protect them both. "Mrs. Dorothy, you don't have to do this," Sarah protested. "Yes, I do, dear. You changed my life. It's only fair I make sure Richard can never hurt you," Dorothy insisted. The following days were tense. Dorothy expected Richard to return with some new strategy, but he never showed. Instead, Michael came alone one afternoon. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked respectfully. "Of course, son. Have a seat," Dorothy offered. "I heard Richard came here with a lawyer. I want you to know Jennifer and I had no idea," Michael explained. "I figured. You were both deceived by him, just like with the abandonment," Dorothy understood. Mom, Richard's always been like this. Even as a kid, he manipulated situations for his own gain, Michael confessed. And why didn't you ever tell me? Dorothy wanted to know. Because you always defended him, said he was the oldest, that he had more responsibilities, Michael reminded her. Dorothy reflected on how often she'd justified Richard's behavior, even when she sensed something was wrong. Michael, I made so many mistakes raising you. I spoiled Richard too much because he was the first child after we lost your father, Dorothy admitted. Mum, you did the best you could. We're the ones failing now. Michael took responsibility. How are things between the three of you? Dorothy asked. Jennifer and I had a huge fight with Richard. We found out he lied about so many things, Michael revealed. What kind of lies? He said you were spending too much on medication, that you'd bankrupt the family. He lied, saying you were losing your mind, Michael told her. Dorothy felt a mix of anger and sadness. Richard had torn the family apart with lies just to avoid taking care of her. What will you do now? Dorothy asked. Jennifer and I want to earn back your trust, Mom. We know it'll take time, but we want to try. Michael was sincere. Son, you can visit me whenever you want. But understand this, I won't depend on you again. I have my own life now. Dorothy set her boundaries. We understand, Mom, and we respect your decision. Michael accepted. After Michael left, Dorothy felt lighter. At least two of her children seemed genuinely remorseful and willing to rebuild their relationship. Mrs. Dorothy, I think things are working out, Sarah observed. There's still a long way to go, dear. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight, Dorothy reflected. But it's a start, Sarah tried to stay optimistic. Yes, it is, and even if it doesn't work out, I've already learned I can live without depending on them. Dorothy smiled with satisfaction. The following week brought a pleasant surprise. Nancy, the neighbor who had been one of Dorothy's first clients, appeared with an unexpected proposal. Mrs. Dorothy, I have a friend who owns a boutique downtown. She saw some of your dresses and wants to talk about a partnership, Nancy announced excitedly. Partnership? What do you mean? Dorothy didn't understand. She wants to sell your pieces in her store. She said it's high-quality work, Nancy explained. Dorothy was speechless. The possibility of having her pieces sold in a boutique seemed surreal. But I'm just a neighborhood seamstress, Dorothy protested. Mrs. Dorothy, you're an artist. Your dresses are one of a kind, Nancy insisted. The next day, Dorothy and Sarah went to visit the boutique. The owner, Melissa, an elegant woman in her 40s, greeted them warmly. Mrs. Dorothy, your dresses are perfect. I have clients who pay well for quality handmade work, Melissa said. How much do you think I could charge? Dorothy asked timidly. Depending on the design, between $200 and $500, Melissa replied, leaving Dorothy stunned. $500 for a dress? Dorothy couldn't believe it. Mrs. Dorothy, you have no idea how valuable your work is. Handmade sewing like yours is rare these days, Melissa explained. Dorothy looked at Sarah, who smiled proudly, seeing the older woman's talent being recognized. But how many pieces would I need to make each month? Dorothy worried about the quantity. Start with 5. If it goes well, we can gradually increase, Melissa proposed. Dorothy accepted the partnership, still in disbelief at the opportunity. On the way home, she was silent, processing the radical change in her life. Mrs. Dorothy, are you okay? Sarah asked with concern. I'm just thinking, dear. 3 months ago, I was abandoned in a hospital, believing my life was over. Today, I'm partnering with a boutique, Dorothy reflected. Life sure takes unexpected turns, Sarah agreed. And to think I could have spent the rest of my days in a nursing home, watching TV and waiting for the end, Dorothy shuddered at the thought. That night, Dorothy worked late on the first dress for the boutique. It was a special design requiring advanced sewing techniques. Sarah watched in awe at the older woman's focus and skill. Mrs. Dorothy, where did you learn to sew like this? Sarah asked. My mother taught me when I was a girl. Later, after I married and my husband passed, I had to refine my skills to earn extra money, Dorothy shared. Did you ever think about working professionally as a seamstress? I did, but my husband didn't think it was suitable for a married woman. After he was gone, I had 3 young children to raise, Dorothy explained. That must have been so hard, Sarah sympathized. It was, dear. But it was also rewarding to see them grow up and graduate. I just never imagined they'd abandon me one day. Dorothy's voice turned melancholic. Mrs. Dorothy, you raised 3 people and managed life alone after losing your husband. That's no small thing, Sarah affirmed. You're right. I just forgot to live for myself too, Dorothy admitted. It's never too late to start, Sarah smiled. Dorothy's first dress for the boutique was finished by Friday. It was a navy blue piece with delicate white lace details, elegant and sophisticated. Melissa was delighted with the result. Mrs. Dorothy, this dress is a work of art. I'm sure it will sell quickly, Melissa praised. I hope so. Dorothy was nervous about her new venture. You can relax. There's always demand for work like this, Melissa reassured her. The following Saturday, the dress was sold to an executive looking for something unique for an important event. Melissa called Dorothy with the good news. Mrs. Dorothy, the dress sold. The client loved it and already ordered another design, Melissa announced. Dorothy hung up the phone and shouted with joy, startling Sarah, who was in the shower. What happened, Mrs. Dorothy? Sarah came running out. It's sold, dear. My first boutique dress sold. Dorothy celebrated like a child. The two hugged, sharing the joy of success. Dorothy had found not just a way to survive, but to thrive. In the following weeks, boutique orders increased. Dorothy had to better organize her time to handle both her neighborhood clients and the exclusive pieces for Melissa. Mrs. Dorothy, I think it's time we rent that 2-bedroom apartment, Sarah suggested. You think so? Dorothy was still afraid of financial commitment. I do. You need a better organized workspace and I need a proper bedroom to sleep, Sarah laughed. Dorothy agreed, and the next week they moved into a larger apartment in the same building. She turned the 2nd bedroom into a proper studio, with good lighting and space to organize all her materials. Now this looks like a serious business, Dorothy remarked, admiring her new workspace. It always was serious, Mrs. Dorothy. Now it's just more organized, Sarah corrected. Dorothy's new life was flourishing when Richard made his final attempt to control the situation. He showed up one Tuesday morning, accompanied by Jennifer and Michael. Mom, we need to talk seriously, Richard declared. Dorothy looked at her 3 children and sighed. She knew this conversation was inevitable. Then talk, Dorothy said, continuing to sew. Mom, you can't keep living with a stranger. It's not right, Richard began. Why isn't it right? Dorothy asked without looking up from her work. Because we're your family. It's our responsibility to take care of you, Richard insisted. Oh, now it's your responsibility? Where was that responsibility when you abandoned me? Dorothy shot back. Jennifer and Michael stayed silent, clearly uncomfortable. Mom, we've apologized for that. Now we want to make it right, Richard tried to justify. Make it right how? By moving me in with one of you and controlling me again? Dorothy wasn't fooled. It's not control, Mom, it's care. Richard lied shamelessly. Dorothy finally stopped sewing and looked directly at Richard. Son, do you want to know the truth? Dorothy asked. Of course, Mom. The truth is, for the first time in my life, I'm truly free. I don't depend on anyone, I don't need permission for anything, and I'm not treated like a burden, Dorothy said with conviction. But you were never a burden to us, Jennifer tried to intervene. Jennifer, you all made it very clear I was a problem that needed solving, remember? Dorothy didn't let it slide. The 3 siblings exchanged glances, with no arguments to counter the truth. Mom, we messed up. But now we want to do better, Michael tried to mediate. Michael, you can do better by visiting me, respecting me, treating me like the mother I've always been. But I won't live dependent on any of you again, Dorothy was firm. What if this woman takes advantage of you? Richard pressed with suspicion. Dorothy stood up and went to a drawer, pulling out an envelope. Richard, do you know what's in here? She asked, holding it up. No idea. It's my will. I left everything to Sarah. Do you know why? Dorothy revealed. The 3 children were shocked by the information. Because she did in 3 months what you didn't do in 73 years of my life. She gave me back my dignity, my independence, my self-respect, Dorothy explained. Mom, you can't do this. We're your children, Richard protested. Exactly. You are my children, and I love you. But love doesn't mean being anyone's doormat, Dorothy said firmly. Richard was visibly furious, but Jennifer and Michael seemed to understand their mother's point of view. "Mom, we respect your decision," said Michael, surprising Richard. "What do you mean, Michael?" Richard turned on his brother. "Richard, stop trying to control everything. Mom is happy, independent, thriving. Isn't that what matters?" Michael challenged. "She's being manipulated," Richard insisted. "Who's manipulating who, Richard?" Jennifer finally spoke up. Richard realized he had lost his siblings' support and stormed out, threatening never to return. "Good," Dorothy called after her son. "That's exactly what you've done before." Jennifer and Michael stayed a little longer, talking calmly with their mother. "Mom, we want you to know we respect your choice," Jennifer said. "And we'll keep visiting you if you'll let us," Michael added. "Of course I will, you're always welcome." Dorothy smiled at them. After Jennifer and Michael left, Dorothy felt lighter. She had faced her children once again and stood her ground with dignity. "Mrs. Dorothy, you were very brave," Sarah praised. "Sweetheart, courage is what you learn when you have nothing left to lose," Dorothy mused. "But you do have a lot to lose now. Your work, your independence, your new life," Sarah pointed out. "That's true, and that's exactly what I'm protecting," Dorothy confirmed. The following months brought growing prosperity for Dorothy. Her pieces at the boutique always sold quickly, and she had built a loyal clientele in the neighborhood. Sarah watched with pride as the elderly woman transformed completely. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you remember how you were at the hospital?" Sarah remarked one afternoon. "Of course I remember. It felt like my life was over," Dorothy reflected. "And now?" "Now I feel like my life is just beginning," Dorothy smiled. It was true. Dorothy had discovered talents she never knew she had, gained independence she never thought possible, and most importantly, learned to live for herself. "Sweetheart, can I tell you a secret?" Dorothy said. "Of course, Mrs. Dorothy. For years I dreamed of having my own studio. When I was young, I thought it was an impossible dream," Dorothy confessed. "And now you do," Sarah smiled. "Thanks to you, dear. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself," Dorothy said gratefully. "I just gave you an opportunity, Mrs. Dorothy. The talent and determination were always yours," Sarah replied humbly. Their lives had intertwined in perfect harmony. Sarah continued working at the hospital, but now she came home knowing someone was waiting for her. Dorothy had found not just a home, but a daughter of the heart. "Sarah, have you ever thought about having children?" Dorothy asked one day. "I have, but I never met the right man, and after meeting you I realized family doesn't have to be blood," Sarah answered honestly. "That's true, dear. You've been more of a daughter to me than my own children these past few years," Dorothy said emotionally. The two embraced, sealing a bond that had become far stronger than any blood tie. A year after being abandoned at the hospital, Dorothy was unrecognizable. She had lost some weight, her hair was always well kept, and she radiated a confidence she had never shown before. "Mrs. Dorothy, you look beautiful today," Nancy complimented her one morning. "Thank you, dear. I'm feeling good," Dorothy smiled brightly. It was true. Dorothy had found her identity beyond motherhood. She had always defined herself as Richard, Jennifer, and Michael's mother. Now she was Dorothy, a talented seamstress, an independent woman, a complete person. "Sarah, you know what I've discovered?" Dorothy said one afternoon. "What, Mrs. Dorothy?" "I've discovered it's never too late to start over. At 74, I'm living the best phase of my life," Dorothy revealed. "And there's still so much life ahead," Sarah smiled. "I hope so, dear. I still have so many dreams to fulfill." Dorothy was full of plans. One of those dreams was expanding her business. Dorothy had started teaching sewing to some interested neighbors, creating a small, informal school in the building. "Mrs. Dorothy, you could formalize these classes," Sarah suggested. "You think so?" Dorothy brightened at the idea. "I do. There are plenty of people who want to learn hand sewing," Sarah encouraged. Dorothy decided to look into the possibility of creating a formal sewing course. She discovered she could register as an LLC and offer official classes. "Dear, I'm going to become a businesswoman at 74. Dorothy laughed at the situation. "Why not? Age is just a number," Sarah supported. Dorothy's sewing course started with 5 students and soon grew to 15. She had become a small business owner. something she never imagined possible. "Mrs. Dorothy, you're an example to all of us," one of the students said. "An example of what, dear?" Dorothy was surprised. "That it's never too late to start over. You inspire us," the student explained. Dorothy was moved by the comment. She had gone from an abandoned elderly woman to a source of inspiration for other women. Jennifer and Michael continued visiting their mother regularly, always respectful and affectionate. Richard never showed up again, but Dorothy didn't let it bother her. "Mom, we're proud of you," Michael said during a visit. "Why, son?" Dorothy wanted to know. "For the strength you've shown, for how you rebuilt your life," Michael explained. "Son, I didn't rebuild my life, I built a new one," Dorothy corrected. It was an important distinction. She hadn't just recovered from abandonment, she had discovered untapped potential and created a completely different existence. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Jennifer said. "Of course, dear." "Do you forgive us for what we did?" Jennifer asked, visibly emotional. Dorothy thought for a moment before answering. "Dear, I forgive you because holding on to bitterness doesn't do anyone any good. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or going back to how things were," Dorothy was honest. "We understand, Mom. We just want to be part of your new life, if you'll let us," Michael requested. "You'll always be part of my life. You just won't be the center of it anymore," Dorothy clarified. It was a new family dynamic, based on mutual respect instead of dependence. Dorothy had learned to love her children without losing herself for them. "Sarah, do you believe in fate?" Dorothy asked one evening. "Sometimes." "Why?" Sarah wondered. "Because I think you came into my life at just the right time, like the universe knew I needed you," Dorothy reflected. "Or maybe we both needed each other," Sarah suggested. "That's true. You gained a family too," Dorothy smiled. "The best family I could have," Sarah said, moved. The two had created a home in the deepest sense of the word, not just a place to live, but a space of love, respect, and mutual growth. "Mrs. Dorothy, there's something I want to tell you," Sarah said. "Go ahead, dear." "Thank you for teaching me that caring for someone can go both ways. Before I met you, I only knew how to give without receiving," Sarah confessed. "And I learned that accepting help doesn't make me any less strong," Dorothy finished. They had healed each other's old wounds. Sarah from the feeling of not being valued in relationships, Dorothy from the belief that her worth depended on sacrificing herself for others. "Dear, want to hear something funny?" Dorothy said. "What?" "My children did me the biggest favor of my life when they abandoned me." Dorothy laughed. "How so?" Sarah was surprised. "If they hadn't done that, I would have never discovered who I truly am. I would have spent the rest of my life just being their mother," Dorothy explained. "You don't regret anything?" Sarah wanted to confirm. "Not a thing, dear. Every pain was necessary for me to get where I am today," Dorothy said firmly. Dorothy's transformation was truly remarkable. From a broken and abandoned woman, she had become whole, fulfilled, and independent. "Mrs. Dorothy, what's your biggest dream now?" Sarah asked. Dorothy thought for a moment before answering. "My biggest dream is to keep living each day like it's a new discovery. I want to keep learning, growing, and surprising myself," Dorothy revealed. "That's the most beautiful dream I've ever heard," Sarah said, moved. "And you, dear? What's your dream?" Dorothy asked. "My dream is to stay by your side, watching you flourish, and maybe one day start my own family without ever forgetting the one I already have," Sarah shared. "Dear, family isn't about replacement, it's about addition. You can have as many families as you want," Dorothy taught her. It was a valuable lesson about love and relationships. Dorothy had learned that the human heart has infinite capacity to love when it isn't limited by fear or dependence. "Mrs. Dorothy, can I ask you for something?" Sarah said. "Anything, dear. Promise me you'll never shrink yourself for anyone again. Promise you'll always remember how much you're worth," Sarah asked. "I promise, dear. And you promise you'll never accept being undervalued." Dorothy returned the request. "I promise," Sarah smiled. The two sealed their pact with a hug, committing to protect each other's dignity and their own. One Sunday morning, Dorothy was organizing her studio when she found the old photo she always carried in her purse. It was a picture of her, with her 3 young children all smiling. "Sarah, come see this," Dorothy called. Sarah approached and looked at the photo. "You were so young," Sarah observed. "I was. And look," Dorothy pointed at her own face in the photo. "I looked happy, but my eyes were sad. And now?" Sarah wondered. Dorothy walked to the wall mirror and studied her reflection. "Now my eyes are truly happy," she concluded, smiling at herself. It was the final proof of her transformation. Dorothy had learned the difference between seeming happy and being happy, between living for others and living for herself, between existing and truly living. "Dear, know what I'm going to do with this photo?" Dorothy asked. "What?" "I'm going to frame it and hang it in the studio. Not to remember the past, but to remember how far I've come," Dorothy decided. The photo would become a symbol of her journey. The young, uncertain woman in the picture had transformed into a confident, mature woman, the owner of her own life. "Mrs. Dorothy, you're truly inspiring," Sarah said. "Dear, the only inspiring thing I did was decide not to give up. The rest followed," Dorothy said modestly. But it was much more than that. Dorothy had shown that it's possible to start over at any age, that a person's worth isn't measured by the usefulness others see in them, and that true family is built with love, not just blood. End of story. So, what did you think of Mrs. Dorothy and Sarah's story? Tell us which part moved you the most, and if you know someone who's been through something similar, leave your honest thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Dorothy made the right decision by rebuilding her life? We love reading your opinions. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.